I didn't notice him at first. Not when the woman at the rescue center led me past rows of barking cages. Not when I politely declined a bouncy terrier and a too-shy shepherd. Not even when I crouched beside a nervous mutt whose eyes darted between me and the exit sign. It was only when I was about to leave, keys clenched in my hand, that I felt it, that quiet, magnetic pull. Something turned me around. There, in the last kennel, was a dog who wasn't barking. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't whimpering. He was sitting. Perfectly still. Golden brown fur, sturdy frame, dark eyes locked on mine like he had been waiting. I froze. "That's Bear," the woman said quietly, stepping up beside me. "Came in a few weeks ago. Nobody's gotten close. He doesn't really bond." He blinked once. Just once. And I felt it, something in my chest shift. Like he had already decided. "He's bonded now," I whispered. I took Bear home that same afternoon. The drive to the cottage was 2 hours. He didn't move once in the back seat. No panting, no pacing, no curiosity, just silence. Like he was memorizing the road, the trees, the turns. Like he knew this place would matter. It was a crisp spring evening when we arrived. The cottage sat at the edge of a forest, tucked away in a bend of the hill. Birds chirped lazily, and the wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth. I opened the car door, expecting him to leap out. He didn't. He waited for me. "Come on, Bear," I coaxed gently. "We're home." Only then did he step down. Slowly. Cautiously. Like he was stepping into something sacred. Inside, I dropped my bags and looked around. The living room was bathed in soft golden light. Wooden beams crisscrossed the ceiling. My grandmother's rocking chair stood in the corner by the fireplace, just as I'd left it the last time I was here, years ago. Bear walked in behind me and immediately pressed his body against my leg. I laughed softly. "You don't waste time, huh?" He didn't wag his tail. He just leaned into me. Solid. Steady. Unmoving. I knelt down and scratched behind his ears. His eyes closed slowly, like he'd been waiting years for this moment. For someone to come home. That night, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and Bear beside me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. That was why I'd come back here in the first place. To get away. From the city. From the noise. From everything that reminded me of who I used to be before it all fell apart. The layoff. The breakup. The panic attacks. I needed a restart. A quiet space. Time to remember who I was before life knocked the breath out of me. I hadn't expected a dog to be part of that. But Bear didn't feel like a decision. He felt like fate. The first sign that something was different came the next morning. I got out of bed, padded barefoot into the kitchen to make coffee, and turned to find Bear standing in the doorway. Watching. Not in a curious way. In a deliberate way. "Good morning," I said, smiling. He blinked. I poured coffee, fed him, and opened the back door to let him out. He didn't move. "Go ahead," I urged. "The yard's fenced. It's all yours." Still nothing. Only when I stepped outside did he follow, close on my heels, almost brushing me. He didn't sniff around or explore. He stayed next to me, eyes flicking to the trees beyond the fence. I knelt down. "You're allowed to relax, you know." He leaned into me again. Not needy. Not nervous. Anchored. By the third day, it became clear that Bear had no intention of ever letting me out of his sight. He followed me from room to room, even if I just stepped into the hallway for a sweater. If I closed a door between us, he pawed at it until I opened it again, gently, but insistently. In the bathroom, he waited outside the door. If I showered too long, he whined softly. If I opened the front door, he stood in front of it. Like a barrier. At first, I found it endearing. Sweet. Maybe he was just adjusting. Maybe he had separation anxiety. I gave him space, reassurance, treats. But after a week, it started to feel heavy. I couldn't move freely. I couldn't step outside without him pressing against my leg. I couldn't breathe without feeling like I was being watched. And not in a creepy way. In a protective way. Too protective. One afternoon, I tried to go for a walk alone, to clear my head, to get a moment to myself. I picked up my coat, opened the door, and stepped out. Bear lunged forward and blocked the doorway. "Bear," I said, surprised. "What are you doing?" He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood there, eyes locked on mine, body tense. I took a step forward. He pressed harder against me. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, I promised, trying to keep my voice light. "I just need." He whined. Soft. Desperate. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he was begging me not to go. I gave up. I stayed. And that night, I couldn't sleep. Bear curled up beside the bed, not touching, but close enough that I could hear every breath he took. My thoughts spiraled. What if this wasn't just a dog being loyal? What if something had happened to him? What if he wasn't protecting himself? What if he was protecting me? I dreamed of shadows that night. Not scary ones, just dark, formless shapes lingering outside the windows. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They just waited. And in the dream, Bear sat between me and the glass. Silent. Still. Unmoving. When I woke up, he was sitting beside the bed. Staring at the door. Over the next few days, I began to keep track of his behavior. He always placed himself between me and exits. He growled softly at the forest line when we walked the perimeter of the yard. At night, he stayed awake longer than I did. Watching. Listening. Waiting. And despite how overwhelmed I felt by his constant presence, I also felt safe. Like I was wrapped in something stronger than locks or walls. Something instinctive. Something ancient. One night, I sat down on the floor beside him, heart pounding. "Why won't you let me go?" I whispered. "What are you trying to keep me from?" Bear rested his chin on my knee. And for the first time since we met, I felt afraid. Not of him. Of what he knew. The next morning, I woke up with a start. It wasn't a nightmare. No screaming, no imagined shadows this time. Just a sudden, tight feeling in my chest, like something unseen was watching me from the corners of the room. But I wasn't alone. Bear was there. Not lying down, not resting, but sitting upright at the foot of the bed, eyes wide open, trained on the door like a soldier on night watch. I sat up slowly. "Hey," I murmured, voice hoarse. "Did you even sleep?" He didn't move. The feeling didn't pass. If anything, it grew heavier. I brushed my teeth with the door cracked open because Bear wouldn't stop whining if he couldn't see me. I made breakfast one-handed because he sat so close my foot couldn't pivot around him. And when I tried to step outside for a second, literally, just to grab a sweater drying on the porch rail, he pushed himself between me and the door again. "Bear," I said carefully, crouching to his eye level, "I need you to let me go outside, okay?" His eyes didn't soften. He wasn't aggressive. But he wasn't going to move either. It was like he believed something out there would take me the second he wasn't there to stop it. I didn't even know what I was afraid of anymore. The forest? The silence? Myself? No. Not really. But something about Bear's watchfulness, the way he anticipated my every movement, was starting to seep under my skin. Not in a creepy way. Not even in an annoying way. In a claustrophobic way. Like his presence had become a second skin I couldn't peel off. Later that afternoon, I pulled out an old notebook and tried to journal, something I hadn't done in months. March 9th, Bear won't let me leave the house alone. He follows me everywhere. I know it's sweet. Protective. But I feel like a prisoner. I stared at the words, fingers tightening on the pen. I came out here to be alone, and now I can't take a step without being shadowed. I don't know what's wrong with him, or with me. Why do I feel like something's wrong? I stopped writing when Bear patted over and placed his paw on the edge of the notebook. Not forcefully. Just there. Looking up at me like he knew. I slammed the notebook shut. I tried calling the rescue center the next day. I asked about Bear's history, if there were any signs of trauma or behavioral issues. The woman on the phone was polite, but vague. We don't know much. He was found tied to a tree in the woods. No tags, no chip. He was skinny, but calm. Never aggressive. We assumed he was abandoned. Did he follow people then too? There was a pause. Well, he never let the staff out of his sight. But it wasn't a problem. Most dogs are a little clingy after being left behind. That word, abandoned. It hung in my chest like a stone. Had he been waiting for someone who never came back? I started giving him space. Or at least I tried. I left the room and gently closed the door behind me. Waited. Counted to 30. Whining. Scratching. The soft thud of his body slumping against the door. By the time I opened it, he was already panting. His eyes wide and glassy. Bear, I whispered, kneeling down. What happened to you? He buried his head in my lap like a child desperate not to be left behind again. It was around that time I began noticing the small things. The front gate, which I always kept latched, swaying open one morning when I stepped outside. The curtain in the guest room, fluttering even when the window was closed. The porch light flickering at night, even though I'd replaced the bulb days earlier. And the cold spots. Places in the house that felt wrong. The hallway outside my bedroom. The back corner of the kitchen. They were subtle, but real. I felt them in my bones. And Bear did too. He would growl under his breath, almost inaudibly, whenever I passed through those areas. Low. Controlled. Like he didn't want to scare me, but needed me to be alert. One night, I tried to take out the trash. It was dark, but the porch light flickered on. I grabbed the bag, slipped on my boots, and opened the door. Bear blocked me instantly. No, I said firmly. You need to move. He didn't budge. Come on. I'll be back in 30 seconds. Still nothing. I pushed past him. He lunged, not to bite, but to stop me. His body pressed against my knee so hard I stumbled back inside. What is wrong with you? I shouted, the sudden rage bursting out before I could contain it. He froze. Tail low. Eyes wide. And then he did something he hadn't done since the day we met. He looked away. Ashamed. The guilt hit me like a truck. I dropped to the floor, reaching for him. I'm sorry, I whispered. I didn't mean to yell. I need some air, Bear. I need space. He crawled forward slowly, placing his head on my shoulder. And I cried. Because it wasn't just him holding on too tight. It was me, too. The next day, I made a decision. I had to leave the house. Alone. Just for a walk. Just to remind myself that I could. That I wasn't trapped. That Bear's fear didn't have to become mine. I waited until mid-morning, when the forest was lit with soft gold and the wind carried birdsong instead of shadows. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes, and knelt down in front of him. I'll be back in 10 minutes. He stood immediately. No, I said, holding up a hand. Not this time. He whined. Please, I whispered. I just need one breath of fresh air. I opened the door. And this time, he didn't block it. But he stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on me. I stepped out, slowly, waiting for him to charge. He didn't. Just stood. Watching. I walked down the gravel path that curved behind the cottage. The sun filtered through the trees. Birds flitted above me. The air was crisp and clear. It felt good. Really good. I turned the corner, smiling for the first time in days. And then I froze. The gate. The back gate, the one that opened toward the forest. It was open. Swinging slightly in the breeze. I hadn't touched that gate in weeks. And I knew for a fact it had been locked. My skin crawled. Suddenly I felt watched. Not in a comforting, bare kind of way. In a wrong way. I turned on my heel and ran back toward the cottage. Heart racing. Mind spiraling. Was someone out here? Had someone been coming through the woods? As I rounded the last bend, I saw him. Bear. Still standing in the doorway. Waiting. Watching. And for the first time I realized. He wasn't keeping me in. He was keeping something out. I didn't sleep that night. Even with the doors locked, the windows shut, and Bear curled beside my bed like a living fortress, my mind raced. Over the sound of the wind in the trees, every creak in the house felt louder. Every shadow longer. The gate had been open. That wasn't just my imagination. And the worst part? It wasn't Bear who had been overreacting. It was me. I got out of bed just after 3 a.m. I couldn't lie still anymore. My legs ached with the urge to move, and my heart hadn't settled since I'd seen that swinging gate. Bear rose instantly, alert and a breath, as though he'd never truly been asleep. I padded into the kitchen, flicked on the light. It didn't come on. Frowning, I tried again. Nothing. That same flickering porch light? It wasn't the bulb. It was the power. Or something interfering with it. Bear sat stiffly beside me, ears rigid, eyes trained on the back door. Okay, I whispered. I believe you now. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and flicked it on. The beam cut through the kitchen and into the hallway. Then I saw it. The back door, latched just hours earlier, was cracked open. My breath caught. The flashlight wavered in my hand. Bear stood in front of me now, growling, not aggressively, but steady, low, protective. A sound like thunder held under the tongue. I slowly stepped forward and pushed the door shut, locking it again. The cold night air drifted in behind it. And something else. A smell. Faint. Earthy. Like wet leaves and rust. Bear, I murmured. I need you to tell me what's going on. Because this is not normal. He turned and pressed his body into my side. Like he was trying to become a wall between me and whatever was on the other side of that door. The next morning, I called the nearest local ranger station, just to ask if anything strange had been reported in the area. Wildlife sightings. Trespassers. Anything. A woman with a tired voice answered. Nothing unusual lately, she said. We get the occasional stray hunter off season. Some kids trying to camp without permits. But nothing that would concern a resident. What about break-ins? Ma'am, she said, the last time someone tried to rob a house out that way, they got chased off by a moose. I forced a laugh and hung up. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The days after that were quiet. Too quiet. Bear didn't leave my side. Even when I tried to shower, he lay just outside the curtain, head facing the door. When I cooked, he sat in the kitchen doorway like a sentry. At night, he lay so close to my bed that I could hear the rhythm of his breathing. But it was his eyes that haunted me most. They were always scanning. Always knowing. On the fourth night, it happened. I'd just finished brushing my teeth and turned off the bathroom light when Bear started growling. He stood in the hallway, head lowered, body stiff. I followed his gaze. To the guest room. The one I never used. The door was open just a crack. Had it been that way before? I stepped forward, heart hammering. Bear moved in front of me. No, I said firmly. Not this time. He paused. Whined. Let me look. I pressed gently past him, pushed the door open, and scanned the room with my flashlight. Nothing. The rocking chair in the corner. The old lamp. The curtain swaying ever so slightly. But then I noticed something on the windowsill. Dirt. Not dust. Fresh dirt. Like someone, or something, had touched it from the outside. I dropped the curtain back into place. The next morning, I made a decision. I drove into town and bought a security camera. Just one, to point at the back porch. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't call the police. What would I say? I feel like something's out there, and my dog won't let me breathe? The camera went up that afternoon. Bear watched me the whole time, tail still, eyes wary. I'm not ignoring you anymore, I told him. We're a team now. Okay? He touched his nose to my wrist. The footage from the first night showed nothing. Not at first. Just a blur of windswept trees, a raccoon sniffing around the trash bin, the porch light flickering again. But around 2:44 a.m., something flickered across the corner of the frame. A shape. Not clearly human. But upright. Moving fast. Too fast. My chest tightened. Bear had woken up at exactly that time. He'd whined. Growled once. Sat at the window for over an hour after. He knew. I went back to the rescue center. I needed answers. The woman behind the desk looked surprised to see me. I need to know more about Bear, I said. Anything. She blinked. Well, like I said, we found him tied to a tree in the woods. He wasn't starving, but he hadn't been fed recently. He had a few scratches. Old ones. Where exactly was he found? She pulled up the file. Near the western ridge. About 3 miles from your cottage. My blood ran cold. That ridge was a 15-minute walk from my back gate. I didn't sleep the next 2 nights. I couldn't. Bear lay by the door, unmoving. When I tried to sleep, I dreamed of trees that whispered. Of shadows that waited. A bear pulling me back, teeth gently on my sleeve, keeping me from stepping out into something I couldn't see. And always that phrase in my head. He wouldn't let me go. I couldn't break free. I had thought it was about me. But now, I wasn't so sure. The next evening, just before sunset, I stood on the back porch and looked at the forest. It was beautiful. Golden light weaving through the trunks. Birds fluttering. A breeze rustling the underbrush. It didn't look dangerous. But something in me knew better now. And Bear? He stood beside me, unmoving. I glanced down at him. You're not trying to control me, are you? His ears twitched. You're trying to protect me. His head turned just slightly, like he understood every word. From what? No answer. Just silence. And the wind in the trees. That night, the camera picked up something else. At 3:12 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. And for a full 10 seconds, the lens captured an image. A figure standing just past the fence line. Motionless. Watching. No face. No light. Just a shape. Human-sized. Perfectly still. Then it stepped back. And was gone. I showed it to a friend later. Could be I'd assumed he was afraid of losing me. But now, standing in the hallway with the video still paused on my phone, showing that grainy, blurred figure standing at the edge of the trees, I finally understood. Bear wasn't afraid I'd leave. He was afraid of what would happen if I did. The morning after the footage, I sat on the porch steps and watched Bear as he sniffed the air, alert as ever. The trees beyond the fence were quiet. Still. Almost too still. I whispered, "You knew. From the beginning, didn't you?" He looked at me then, really looked. There was no fear in his eyes. Only a kind of solemn certainty. Like a soldier standing guard. Like he'd accepted long ago that his job wasn't to play or run or rest. It was to protect. At all costs. Even from me. I went back to the rescue center one last time. I had a gut feeling, something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge until now. The same woman greeted me, but this time I pushed. "Where exactly did you find Bear? What part of the woods?" She frowned. "I told you, near the western ridge." "Why? Was anyone else reported missing around that time? Hikers? Campers?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. A pause. "There was one." I leaned forward. "One what?" She lowered her voice. "A woman disappeared near that area. About a month before we found him. No body. No signs of struggle. Her dog went missing too." My heart dropped. "Do you think," I began. "Do you think he was her dog?" Another pause. "We've wondered. But we couldn't confirm it. He didn't respond to her name, or any commands we knew she used. And she didn't have family to identify him." My breath caught. "What was her name?" "Marla." Marla. The name echoed in my mind like a distant memory I'd never had. When I got home, I sat on the floor and stared at Bear. He stared back, still as a stone. "Were you hers?" I asked. No bark. No tail wag. Just those dark eyes. Watching. Waiting. I reached for my phone and searched for her name. It didn't take long to find the articles. Local woman missing near Western Ridge Trailhead, search efforts suspended after 2 weeks without evidence, missing woman's dog still unaccounted for. The photos showed a woman in her mid-30s with long auburn hair and a gentle smile. And beside her, in 2 different shots, was a golden brown dog. Tall. Calm. Focused. My hand began to shake. It was Bear. I closed the phone and looked at him again. "You tried to save her, didn't you?" He blinked slowly. "I don't know what happened to her. But you saw it. You were there. And now?" The truth slid into my mind like a blade. "You think it's coming for me too?" That night, I brought Bear into the studio. I laid out my supplies, lit a few candles, and sat in silence while he curled up by the door, guarding me even as I painted. It wasn't a conscious image that came to me. It was instinct. Memory. Emotion. I painted the trees, tall and dark, their branches like outstretched fingers. I painted a shadow in the distance. Faceless. Cold. Watching. And I painted Bear. Standing in the foreground. Unmoving, facing it down. He was my shield, and I had never seen him more clearly. I left the painting propped against the wall and sat with him on the floor. His head rested in my lap. I traced the soft fur behind his ears and whispered. "I don't know what's out there. I don't know what it did to her. But I know you'll never let it take me." His tail thumped once. Then silence again. But it wasn't empty. It was full of knowing. The next day, something changed. Bear didn't follow me from room to room. He didn't block doors. He just sat by the front window and watched the forest. The shift scared me more than the growling ever had. It was like, he knew it was coming soon. And that words, steps, warnings, none of them would be enough anymore. I didn't go outside. I didn't dare. Instead, I printed every news article I could find. I mapped out the ridge, the hiking trails, the spot where Marla was last seen. I looked for patterns, evidence, anything. But there was nothing. Only gaps. Dead ends. Cold trails. And Bear's eyes, always on the trees. Around midnight, I opened the back door to let in some air. Just for a moment. Bear sprang up so fast I nearly dropped my tea. He was beside me in a flash, tail stiff, ears perked. I stepped out. He didn't stop me. But he followed. Close. The wind had picked up. It smelled like rain and something sharper. Feral. My skin prickled. And that's when I saw it. Not clearly, just a flicker. Between two trees. A darker shape against the night. Gone in a blink. Bear growled, deep and warning. Not for me. To whatever was out there. And I knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, flashlight in one hand, Bear resting against my side like a wall of muscle and fur. We both stared at the front door. Waiting. Nothing came. But the silence pressed in like a hand around my throat. In the morning, I found muddy prints by the back porch. Not animal. Boots. 2 distinct steps, leading to the door. And none going away. The police were polite. They came. They looked around. Wrote a report. Told me it was probably a lost hiker or local prankster. Bear growled the entire time they were there. After they left, I locked every window. Every door. And then I did something I hadn't done since I moved in. I let Bear onto the bed that night. He didn't hesitate. He curled up beside me like a sentinel. And I held onto his collar while I fell asleep, as if letting go would mean I'd disappear too. He wouldn't let me go. Not because he didn't trust me. But because he trusted no one else. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what he'd lost. And now I knew why. Because whatever had taken her, Marla, had come back. The night it all came to a head started out eerily still. No wind. No rustling trees. No forest sounds at all. The silence outside felt unnatural, like the woods were holding their breath. Even Bear had gone quiet. He sat by the front door, rigid and motionless, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Not blinking. Not twitching. His tail, usually thumping faintly against the floor when I moved, stayed flat. Still. Bear, I whispered, crouching beside him, my fingers brushing the fur on his back. What do you feel? He turned his head slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. There was something in his gaze I hadn't seen before. Not just protection. Not just fear. Resolve. I should have been used to it by now, Bear's behavior, his silent guarding, his refusal to leave my side. But tonight was different. There was no pacing. No growling. No restless energy. There was only one message radiating from his whole body. Stay inside. So I did. I locked all the doors, drew every curtain, turned off every light except for one dim lamp in the living room. Then I waited. It started around 2 a.m. A sound on the porch, soft, deliberate steps. Like someone trying not to be heard. I froze. Bear stood. And then the door handle turned. Just a subtle jiggle at first. Then a sharper twist. The lock held. My breath caught in my throat. Bear didn't bark. He didn't charge. He just moved to the center of the room and stood there, facing the door, like a statue carved out of instinct and duty. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers. No signal. Of course. Out here, signal was always spotty, but never gone. Until now. A second sound, this time at the window. A slow, dragging motion against the glass. I backed toward the hallway, unsure whether to run, to scream, or to hide. Bear didn't move. He waited. And then, for the first time since I'd brought him home, he barked. One deep, thunderous bark that shook the walls. Then another. And another. Whatever was outside stopped. A pause. Then retreating steps, fast, crashing through brush and leaves. Gone. I didn't move for a long time. Bear stood perfectly still for several minutes after, watching the door, listening. Then he turned to me, slowly, walked over, and sat at my feet. I dropped to my knees and buried my face in his fur. "You did it," I whispered. "You knew. All this time, you knew." His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. No tension now. No fear. Just calm. In the morning, I stepped out onto the porch, Bear right behind me. There were footprints again. Fresh ones. Too large to be mine. Too deep to be just a wanderer passing by. They stopped at the porch. And then turned around. Whoever, or whatever, it was, had left. Because of Bear. Because he didn't back down. Later that day, I drove into town, sat down with a ranger I'd met once before, and showed him the photos of the prints. I told him everything I'd seen, heard, suspected. I left out nothing. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not the first." "What?" He hesitated. "There've been whispers. Reports of strange things. People seeing figures at night. Motion sensors tripping for no reason. Animals going missing. We've never had anything solid. But, it lines up. Why hasn't anything been done?" He shook his head. "Because by the time anyone comes to investigate, it's gone. Always." "And Marla?" He looked away. "We don't talk about her much anymore. But yeah, some of us think it wasn't just an accident." When I got home, I found Bear lying in the sunlight near the back door. Relaxed. Breathing deeply. For the first time since we met, his body wasn't tight with tension. His tail wagged lazily when I stepped through the door. It felt final. Like he knew the job was done. I sat beside him, pressing my forehead to his. "I thought you were holding me hostage," I murmured. "I thought you were smothering me. But all you ever did was keep me safe." He licked my hand once. Just once. Then closed his eyes and rested. Over the next few weeks, the forest stayed quiet. No open gates. No muddy prints. No flickering porch lights. And Bear? He changed. He let me walk alone down the gravel path. He stopped standing at the bathroom door. He slept deeply, often snoring gently, no longer waking at the slightest sound. It was like he'd let go of something he'd carried for too long. One morning, I took him back to the western ridge, the place where he'd been found. I'd avoided it for so long, but it felt right now. Like something needed closing. We stood at the edge of the trail where the trees grew dense and the shadows deeper than they should be. Bear didn't growl. He just looked. Not afraid. Not angry. Just present. Like he remembered everything. And forgave it anyway. I found a spot by the stream and sat down. Bear lay beside me, tail sweeping the leaves. "I think she loved you," I said. "Marla. Whoever she was. I think she meant to come back. I think you waited." His head turned slightly. "You never gave up on her. And when I came along, you didn't let it happen again." He placed his paw over my foot. And in that touch, I felt the weight of everything he'd carried. All the nights he stayed awake. All the times he blocked the door. All the growls into the dark. Not because he was afraid. But because he refused to fail. We stayed there until the sun dipped below the treetops. And when we left, I didn't look back. Neither did Bear. Months passed. Life began to breathe again. I painted. I worked. I met new people. I laughed, and always, Bear was there, calm, steady, no longer clinging to me like a shadow, but walking beside me as an equal. He had finally let me go. Because I had become strong enough to stand. Sometimes, at night, I still feel it, the watchful gaze, the quiet press of something outside the window. But I never feel afraid. Because Bear taught me how to see it. How to survive it. How to face it. The last line of my journal that year read. He wouldn't let me go, and now I understand. He wasn't holding me back. He was holding me together.